You wanted to understand Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius? So we're doing a deep dive into his personal writings, Meditations.
Yeah, it's really a unique thing, this book. A private journal not even meant for anyone else to read. So we get a real unfiltered look at this guy, his thoughts and struggles.
I mean, think about it. We're talking about the most powerful man in the world, an emperor facing wars, plagues, political intrigue, the whole bit.
Right, but also really grappling with these big philosophical questions. I mean, timeless stuff. Makes you think, right?
It does. Okay, so let's rewind a bit. How did he even get into philosophy?
Okay.
Marcus wasn't exactly born into this world, was he?
No, he had, a very structured upbringing and rigorous education, I'd say.
Right, and early on it was all about rhetoric.
Absolutely. Rhetoric was super important in Roman society. You needed it for politics, law, everything, really.
So who are some of the big names who trained him?
Oh, there's Herodes Atticus, for one. But then Marcus's focus shifted to philosophy, and even his teacher Fronto, he actually seemed kind of, almost regretful about it.
Interesting. So when does this shift really become apparent in Meditations?
I'd say right from the beginning. Book 1, he names some of the philosophers who were important to him, like Sextus of Chaeronea.
And what was Sextus's deal? What did Marcus take from him?
Well, Sextus taught him a lot about kindness and being in harmony with nature. You can really see that influence in Meditations.
That's fascinating. So this foundation, I guess, it really shaped his whole approach to ruling, right? He became the quote-unquote philosopher king, trying to put Stoic principles into practice while running an empire.
Well, that's the ideal, but Roman imperial rule, let me tell you, wasn't exactly a walk in the park.
Right, he had this theoretical absolute power, but in reality...
Oh, there were tons of limitations, practical stuff he had to deal with.
Yeah, rebellions, natural disasters, that awful plague that ripped through the empire.
Yeah.
Not the most peaceful setting to ponder philosophy.
No kidding. But that's where Meditations really gets interesting. You can see how he's using Stoicism to work through these problems. It's like his toolkit for leadership, for dealing with any kind of stress, really.
Speaking of stress, wasn't there this whole situation with his co-regent, Lucius Verus?
Oh yeah, Verus. Some historians, they paint him as, kind of a party animal, not exactly the perfect match for a Stoic emperor, you know what I mean?
I can imagine. So what was their dynamic like?
It was complicated for sure. I mean, Verus was sent east to handle the Parthian War, which left Marcus to manage all the chaos back in Rome.
Okay, let's dive into Stoicism itself for a minute, because for Marcus, this wasn't just an academic philosophy, right? It was a way of life.
Absolutely. Stoicism, it gave him a framework for understanding the universe and where he fit into it.
So, what are the core concepts here? What did Stoics believe?
Well, one big idea is this thing called logos. It's like a rational force, a kind of universal intelligence that governs everything.
So almost like a divine principle.
Right. They sometimes called it nature, providence, even God in some ways. And because of logos, Stoics believed in determinism.
Determinism. So everything's preordained, no free will.
Well, not exactly. Their idea of free will was more about accepting fate and choosing how you respond to it.
Okay, so it's not about being passive, but about choosing your attitude, how you navigate whatever comes your way.
Right, and this idea, it's really central to how Marcus operates, both as emperor and just as a guy trying to live a decent life. He talks about these 3 disciplines in Meditations: perception, action, and will.
And these disciplines, are they like a how-to guide for living as a Stoic?
You could say that. He even has this one line, a very Stoic line, where he writes, objective judgment, unselfish action, willing acceptance of all external events.
So basically control what you can, which is how you see things and what you do, and then accept whatever else happens.
Exactly. And he's constantly reminding himself of this. Stay objective, act for the good of Rome, and roll with the punches, whatever fate throws at you.
It's like Meditations is his personal coach, reinforcing these principles every day.
Yeah, almost like that.
And there are all these figures he mentions, people who embody these ideas for him. Socrates, for example, pops up a lot.
Oh yeah, Socrates. The ultimate Stoic role model, right? Facing death without flinching. Marcus totally admired that kind of integrity.
And then there's Heraclitus.
Yeah.
Remember that line about never stepping in the same river twice?
Right. Always changing, always in flux. That must have resonated with Marcus, especially with all the ups and downs of imperial life.
It makes sense. One thing we have to remember is that Meditations was never supposed to be published.
Right, it was personal, just for him. And that's why it's so fascinating, such a raw and honest look into his mind.
because he wasn't trying to impress anyone or create some polished image of himself.
Exactly. And you see that in the writing, too. It's all over the place. Sometimes it's just these little reminders to himself. Then you get these really carefully crafted passages.
He was a good writer, clearly.
Oh, yeah, very skilled. You also notice all this vivid natural imagery throughout the book.
I wonder if finding peace in nature helped him deal with the pressure of running the empire.
It's an interesting thought. Maybe nature was his escape, his anchor amidst all the chaos.
Could be.
Mm.
But here's where things get really tricky. So he's a devout Stoic, right? Believes in this kind of impersonal divine force, logos. But then he talks about having a personal relationship with the gods.
It is a weird contradiction, isn't it? I mean, at the end of book 1, he's thanking the gods for intervening directly in his life. He even mentions specific examples.
Right. And in another spot, he says, I know the gods exist from having felt their power over and over.
It seems like he's trying to reconcile these two things, Stoicism and this more personal kind of spirituality.
It definitely creates this tension throughout the text. How do you think he ultimately brought those ideas together?
It's hard to say for sure, but maybe.
Well, let's hold that thought and jump into book 2 next time. We can see how he tackles some very personal reflections there.
Sounds good. I'm curious to see where he goes with it. So last time, we left off with this interesting tension in Meditations.
Right, this idea that Marcus Aurelius is a Stoic, believing in an impersonal divine force, but he also talks about personal relationships with the gods.
It's definitely one of those head-scratcher moments. Makes you think, how did he reconcile those ideas?
Exactly. So book 2, where does Marcus take us in this section?
Well, he gets really introspective, almost somber in some parts. There's this recurring theme of accepting our own mortality, death.
He seems to see it as just a natural part of life.
Right, like birth and aging, just another stage. And he makes it clear that no one escapes death, not even emperors or philosophers. He uses this powerful image comparing human life to a river that's constantly flowing.
I think I remember that passage.
He says, think how much is going on inside you every second, in your soul, in your body. Why should it astonish you that so much more, everything that happens in that all-embracing totality is beyond your control? It's a pretty profound thought when you really stop and think about it.
Yeah, it definitely makes you put things in perspective. So what's the takeaway?
I guess the message is to focus on what you can control, your thoughts, your actions, and not get hung up on stuff that's outside your influence.
So that's where Stoicism comes in.
Absolutely. In book 5, he has this line, just as you overhear people saying that the doctor prescribes such and such for him, like riding or cold baths or walking barefoot, say this, nature prescribed illness for him, or blindness, or the loss of a limb, or whatever.
Wow, it's like he's saying everything, even hardship, has its place in the grand scheme of things.
Right. That's the Stoic mindset in a nutshell. Accepting fate, embracing whatever comes your way. It's not about being passive, but about understanding that some things are just beyond our control and choosing how we respond. He reminds himself of this again in book 6, saying, choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been.
So our suffering is often self-inflicted in a way. It's our perception of events, not the events themselves, that causes the pain.
That's where the discipline of perception kicks in. Stoics believed in training yourself to see things objectively without letting your emotions get in the way.
So how does this play out in the rest of the book?
Well, in book 7, he talks about recognizing our place in this larger whole, a community of rational beings. He talks about moving from one unselfish action to another with God in mind.
So acting for the common good, contributing to the well-being of society.
That's the idea. Then in book 8, he starts reflecting on fame and fortune, how fleeting they are.
That's a pretty universal theme, I guess.
Oh, totally. He lists all these big names from history, emperors, generals, philosophers, the whole lot, and points out that they're all dead and forgotten. No one remembers them.
Ouch. That's a reality check. What does he say exactly?
He says, so remember, your components will be scattered too, the life within you quenched, or marching orders in another posting. It's a bit morbid, but the point is clear.
Don't get too attached to worldly achievements.
Exactly, because in the end, none of it really matters.
So what else does he talk about in this section?
Well, he keeps hammering home the point about controlling your thoughts, not being ruled by anger, fear, or desire.
I guess that's easier said than done.
You got that right. But then in book 9, he gets into this really interesting discussion about injustice. He says, injustice is a kind of blasphemy. Nature designed rational beings for each other's sake. To help, not harm one another as they deserve. To transgress its will, then, is to blaspheme against the oldest of the gods. He seems to be saying that morality is all about living in harmony with nature.
So when we act unjustly, we're violating this natural order.
Right. He even suggests that lying is a form of blasphemy because it goes against truth, against the way things are.
That's a fascinating perspective. So if everything is predetermined, where does evil come from? How does he grapple with that?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? He definitely struggles with it in this section, acknowledging how hard it is to reconcile those two ideas.
What's his take, though?
He says, either the world's intelligence wills each thing, if so, accept its will, or it exercise that will once and for all and all else follows as a consequence, and if so, why worry? So whether everything is meticulously planned or just a chain reaction from some initial act, the response should be the same: acceptance.
Okay, but if everything's predetermined, what about the gods? Do they even care? What role do they play?
That's another tough one. But he seems to land on this idea that even if the gods don't intervene directly, we can still find meaning in aligning ourselves with the universe's rational order, that logos we talked about.
Makes sense. So as we move into Book 10, does he start to offer any solutions, any practical advice for living a good life?
He does, actually. He reminds himself that true happiness comes from within, from living virtuously. And he keeps repeating this mantra: concentrate on what you can control, ignore what you can't.
That's Stoicism in a nutshell, isn't it?
It really is. Focus on your thoughts, your actions, your responses, and let go of everything else.
Any other nuggets of wisdom in this section?
Oh yeah, he stresses the importance of living in the present moment, not dwelling on the past or worrying about the future.
Which is, of course, way easier said than done.
Totally. But he's really pushing for this idea that we need to be more mindful, more present in our lives.
Okay, so as we head into the later books, does this theme continue?
It does. In Book 11, he gets into the nature of the rational soul. He outlines these characteristics like self-awareness, self-examination, and shaping yourself according to your will.
So taking control of your own development, your own growth.
Right. He says it reaps its own harvest, unlike plants, and in a different way, animals, whose yield is gathered in by others.
He's highlighting what makes us human, I guess, that ability to choose our path and shape our inner world.
Exactly. And he also keeps bringing up death, but not in a scary way. More like this natural transition, a return to the elements.
That's a very Stoic view.
It is. He has this one line that really stuck with me. He says, soon you'll be ashes or bones. A mere name at most. And even that is just a sound, an echo. The things we want in life are empty, stale, and trivial. He's challenging himself and us to look beyond these fleeting pleasures and focus on living a virtuous life.
To align ourselves with nature, with the logos.
Exactly. And he also stresses the importance of being kind to others, even those who wrong us.
So forgiveness, compassion, all that good stuff.
Right. He says, the best revenge is not to be like that. Respond to negativity with grace, not by stooping to their level.
Good advice for any emperor, and probably for all of us. So as he gets into these last few books, is he still focused on his role as emperor? Or is it more personal now?
It's a blend, but he definitely keeps reminding himself of his responsibilities. You can tell he's aware of the need to lead by example, to embody these Stoic principles.
What kinds of things does he say about leadership?
He talks about justice, serving the common good, and using his power wisely. There is this one part where he talks about to speak to the Senate or anyone in the right tone without being overbearing, to choose the right words. It's like he's striving to be this really just and compassionate ruler.
Trying to live up to his ideals, even with all the pressures of being emperor.
Yeah. And he's honest about the temptations of power, the tendency towards arrogance. He keeps reminding himself to stay grounded.
It makes him seem very human, very relatable.
It does, and that's what's so great about Meditations. It's not just a philosophy textbook, it's a personal journey, this raw, honest account of a guy trying to live a good life in a world that's anything but simple.
So in Book 12, does he come full circle? Tie everything together?
In a way, he does. He keeps returning to these core themes: accepting death, finding happiness within, and living in harmony with nature.
It sounds like a good reminder for all of us.
It is, and he leaves us with this powerful image of the rational soul saying how the mind conducts itself. It all depends on that. All the rest is within its power or beyond its control. Corpses and smoke.
It's like he's saying that our inner world shapes our experience of reality.
Exactly. Our thoughts, our beliefs, our attitudes, that's what determines how we see the world and how we navigate it.
Wow, lots to think about.
There is.
So as we wrap up this section of Meditations, What's the big takeaway for you? What really resonated?
For me, it's that reminder to focus on the present moment. Even as emperor, Marcus Aurelius had all these enormous responsibilities and challenges, but he found peace in focusing on the task at hand, on doing what was right in each moment.
That's a great insight. And hopefully this deep dive has encouraged everyone listening to explore meditations for themselves.
Absolutely. There's so much wisdom to be found in these pages. It really is a powerful idea, isn't it? This power we have over our own minds.
It is. This passage really gets to the heart of Stoicism. It's about realizing that our true power lies in our ability to control our own thoughts and reactions, no matter what's happening around us.
Marcus Aurelius was no dummy. He knew that life throws curveballs, things we just can't control.
But he also knew that a lot of our suffering comes not from those events themselves, but from how we choose to think about them.
Exactly. He writes, "There's only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will."
It's so easy to get caught up in worrying about things we can't change.
It is, but that's where Stoicism comes in. It's not about giving up or being passive, but about channeling your energy into the things you can actually influence, your thoughts, your actions.
That's where true freedom lies, I guess, in choosing how we respond.
He says it beautifully here. The universe is constantly changing, and we cannot control the flow of events, but we can control our reactions to those events.
That's a powerful reminder.
It is, and he encourages us to embrace challenges, to see them as opportunities for growth, to develop that mindset of acceptance.
So this passage from Book 12, it's basically saying we have the power to choose our own happiness.
I think that's a great way to put it.
It's about shifting our focus away from what we can't control to what we can, our own minds.
Exactly. If we cultivate a Stoic mindset, we can find peace and fulfillment even when things get tough, even in the midst of those inevitable storms.
Well, this brings us to the end of our deep dive into Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. It's been quite a journey.
It has. We've explored so much: his Stoic philosophy, his personal struggles, and the timeless wisdom he offers in this book.
And hopefully this has inspired everyone listening to pick up Meditations and discover their own insights.
Absolutely. There's so much to unpack in there. But if you're just walking away with a few key takeaways, I'd say remember this. Focus on what you can control. Accept what you cannot. And live in the present moment.
Great advice, I'd say. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it enlightening.
It's been a pleasure. And as Marcus Aurelius himself reminds us, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts.
So choose your thoughts wisely. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep growing.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.